Once people realize consciousness is not generated by the brain, that maybe consciousness is separate from the body, right? Once you've made that leap, then it's much easier to say, okay, consciousness could survive death. Consciousness could be reincarnated, right? So it's changing, and it's becoming, people are becoming more and more open to this, and it's becoming easier and easier to publish in mainstream journals.
So wait, can you help me here? So if consciousness exists outside of the body, what does that mean?
On the podcast today, we've got Reshma Saujani, the founder of Girls Who Code and the CEO of Moms First. She's a dear friend of mine. We go back almost a decade now, which is wild to say. I've always known her to be spiritual. I did not expect her today to ask about reincarnation. Dr. Jim Matlock is one of the few people who studies this space. And when I say one of the few, I mean, like, I can count on one or two hands the number of people who study reincarnation and past lives. And most of them are at University of Virginia's Department of Parapsychology, which is how I found Dr. Matlock. The conversation just took twists and turns I didn't expect. There's one thing I want you to think about while you're listening, which is apparently kids are the people most likely to experience past lives, reincarnation, memories of past lives. So I'm curious, while you're listening, do you recall as a kid having memories of a past life? Do you know a kid in your life who maybe has memories that they shouldn't have? I don't know, sailing on a boat if they haven't been on a boat. Call me and let me know. Reach out, email. I'm super curious to hear. Anyway, give it a listen. Hope you enjoy, and please reach out. Quickly, just to set the table here and introduce the two of you. So Jim, I've told you a little bit about Reshma on our call that we did earlier, but she is the founder of the biggest girls nonprofit in the country, probably the world, Girls Who Code, which is how we first came to meet each other. She's an author, has delivered TED Talks, now is the CEO of Moms First, which is an organization advocating for paid leave and caregiving benefits for parents. I could go on and on. It's like, what hasn't Reshma done? But she's also a dear friend.
Don't embarrass her.
I know. Please stop.
I can't not. But she also so sweet. She was so busy and is so busy, but made time for this, even with an emergency dental appointment this morning. She was like, I'm going to be there. Don't worry about it. So Reshma, that's Reshma. And Reshma, let me introduce you to Jim. He was referred over to me. I was kind of looking around when you told me I want to talk about reincarnation and past lives, which I did not expect you to say when I was like, what are you curious about?
Well, it's a wonderful topic.
Yeah, it's great. And let's do some research. And Dr. Matlock, would you prefer Dr. Matlock or Jim, by the way?
Jim. Yes, call me Jim.
All right,
Maybe
Jim it is.
Doctor.
Is an anthropologist and leading researcher in reincarnation. There are very few people like you, Jim.
I mean,
and
what a gift that I have today. That's amazing. So great to meet you, Jim.
Yeah, it's good to meet you too. It'd be a wonderful talk.
Yeah, he was referred over by a few of the folks at UVA, who is I guess one of the leading departments and only departments in the country, I think, that deeply study this work. So Reshma, I'd love to kick it to you first to just I also didn't get a ton of context from you on the call as our first call. Why reincarnation and why past lives? What made you say that? What experience have you had that you were like, I would like to talk to an expert about this?
Well, first of all, I'm a Hindu. So we believe, religiously, we believe in reincarnation. But every good Hindu, our parents didn't really teach us all that much about it, right? So it's a belief that I have that I don't know a lot about. The second thing is I'm also big into astrology. I get my palm read all the time. And, when you kind of, dabble in astrology, a lot of what people talk to you about is your past lives. And so it's just something that I have been really interested in, but don't really know as much the science of. So, or what someone like you has discovered about it or studied about it. And so that's why I'm really excited to chat with you. If you're down, Jim, I got some questions.
If I'm down, I'm up for it. Let me say.
If you're up for it. Yeah, but did anything I say have you talked to other people who've approached it from a place of religion and their spiritual beliefs are that, and they want to learn more?
No, not exactly. I have to say, more from in the West, from a skeptical point of view, from a religious point of view that denies reincarnation Christianity, and not so much. I think you're the first Hindu that I've talk to about this. And so I look forward to that because it'll be a different sort of perspective. Because you have ideas about reincarnation that come from your religion, right? I presume. But I'll be curious to know, whether you've had acquaintance with cases with children who remember previous lives, are the sorts of things that we study when we study this.
Well, let's get started there. I mean, so how did you even get into studying past lives? Was there like a moment or a story that like shifted how you thought about life and death?
Actually, it was what I wanted to do with my life from very early on was to be a writer, a creative writer. I held that idea all the way through college. When I got out, I found it was really hard to make a living being a creative writer. But meanwhile, I had majored in English, read a lot of literature, wanting to be a writer. The theme of rebirth and sometimes of reincarnation, sometimes it was just the concept of rebirth, and other times it was reincarnation, the past life memories part of it kept coming up again and again and again. So I was intrigued by it. I was really intrigued by it, but I didn't really know anything about it at this point. This was early 80s, maybe around 1980s, I figured. I was living in Alexandria, Virginia at the time. I went to my local library. Because Stevenson is at the University of Virginia, the local library in Virginia had his books. He's more or less a local author. And so that sort of led me into, his research. Once I started reading that, I mean, I was hooked. That he also led me into serious parapsychology. So I've been in serious parapsychology with a focus on reincarnation research ever since. I went on and got a degree in anthropology, but still focused on reincarnation.
So, Jim, does a lot of the research start with kids who remember a past life?
That's where the research starts with. And that's what Stevenson focused on, is the children who recall past lives, and then trying to check them out, see if there's any validity to these claims, right?
Yeah.
Um, and as it turns out, amazingly, there are very often, I mean, a lot of his cases are Indian, North Indian.
Yep. Can you share one of them like that, like really stuck out for you?
So he first went to India in 1961. That's when started his research. And he published his first book of case reports in 1966 called 20 Cases Suggestive Reincarnation. And that had 7 Indian cases in it. And I'll describe one of them. So typically in these cases, it's a young kid, maybe 2, 3 years old, no more than that.
Oh, that's young.
Yeah, really young. Yeah, really young. And this is one of the things that interested Stevenson because they were so young. When he first went to India, he had been reading something about these cases, right? And he imagined that it was just memories. But when he got there, he found that it's not just memories because very often the memories had led the families to identify the person that they were talking about. Because not only are these young kids, particularly in India, they'll remember a life in a neighboring village. They remember the name of the village. Okay. They know how to get there.
Wow.
Right. I know. And so the families, even before Stevenson, have, quote, what we say, solved these cases. And so when Stevenson went there in 1961, he's presented with all of these solved cases. And what jumped out at him, was that not just these memories. When you solve a case and you know the person that is being talked about, what you see is these kids, they behave like them. They recognize people from the earlier life. Motions carry over. This is why, as a mid-career psychiatrist, once learned about these cases firsthand, he was like hooked, as I became hooked, reading his
Yeah.
cases and couldn't get away from it for the rest of his career.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. So, okay, if it's a 2-year-old, is he remembering when he's remembering a past life? How far in the past is it? Like, is that in
Yeah,
like 18th century? Is that 10 years ago? Like, how far is it, or does it depend?
well, it depends. There's no rule about this, but in Stevenson's cases, and most of his were Asian, India, and then he went on, he did some in Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was, and then Sri Lanka later, also Thailand, Burma. Majority of his cases are from that part of Asia. The median intermission length is only 15 months. Intermission length between death and rebirth. So we're talking about,
Wow.
Whoa.
so we're talking about the past lives that ended very,
Very recently.
Oh my
recently.
gosh.
And that's why the people are still living, right? The life, the families are still there for the kids to go back and recognize. The places not changed that much, right? And so they can recognize the places. Many of them will actually show the way back to where they say they live.
It's so funny. My son is 5 years old, and one night we were in bed, and he said to me, Mommy, I was with God and I was watching you.
Okay.
And I wanted to go to another family, but God told me that I had to go to you. And it was
Oh,
just, it was like wild. Because I believed him, actually. The way he said it was so much
Wisdom.
like sincerity though too, right? So it is. So what is the middle then? Is it like my son described? Like, are they sitting with God in between the lives, or what do you think?
well, it's actually fairly common in about 20%, that many of these cases where they have past life memories that'll also talk about the term is intermission, that's Stevenson's term, the interval between the death and rebirth. They'll talk about what they remember. They often do talk about, sometimes meeting God, sometimes meeting Jesus, but this varies depending on the culture. This is what you hear from Western kids.
Mm.
An Indian living in India will talk about Shiva, not about Jesus or God,
Yeah.
right? It's all the same sorts of figures, the same sorts of activities, but within that cultural frame. The reason that I was really interested in what you were saying is that typically in these cases, there is either sort of a voluntary decision to go to the new parents, or there can be these assisting spirits like your son talked about. But the assisting spirits normally do not direct one to the new mother, and they don't ordinarily block one from one's preference. It's really interesting. Now, what happens sometimes, the children talk about having gone to one mother, but the mother, it turns out, was past childbearing age, so they couldn't go to her. So they had to go to another mother.
Wow.
That is one way what to interpret this. God, or the entity that he identified as God, recognized that his previous mother was no longer able to bear children, and
Right.
therefore he directed her to you.
Or so I'm gonna also sorry, so I'm gonna tell you another story. So I was really, really, really struggling before I had Cy. And I just was having miscarriage after miscarriage. I had a history of miscarriage for
Okay.
my first child. And I was really desperate. And my acupuncturist had said to me, "Have you ever heard about soul babies?" And there's a woman, or there's these services where you can actually, have you heard of this? Where you can call in. Okay, so it's called Soul Babies, and there's people who you can talk to that are intermediaries. That when, because I had this, when I was with Cy, I just had this. Everyone was like, "You're fine. You have one child. He's beautiful. Let it go." You know what I mean? I was 43, and I just couldn't let it go because I felt like there was this soul that was supposed to be with me. And I just felt broken and empty without what now is my son. And so I met with this kind of intermediary to talk to my soul baby, and essentially she had said to me, essentially he's not ready. And it's funny, as I was telling you the story and I was thinking about science and I was thinking about what she said, maybe too in that moment, he was always supposed to, like, he just, like, God was giving him a little nudge, not like, not demanding that he go to me, but like, maybe it was like Cy wasn't ready too, right? Because I guess when you're in this intermission period, what is it like, I guess?
Well, that's an interesting question because it's described in different ways. Westerners, as you can imagine, describe it as heaven-like, right? And they describe the angels and Jesus and God and this sort of stuff. Um, what we hear more typically in Asia is, I like to call it the interlife rather than the afterlife, passes in a realistic terrestrial setting. So, like in one of Stevenson's cases, the guy hung out, this is one of his Indian cases, the guy said he hung out in a tree,
Mm.
right, in the courtyard of his former home. And while he was there, he saw various things happening, right? And he talked about things that the family had done. He talked about and named the children that were born after his death and things like this. So it seems like he really was watching it, right? But yeah, in India and other parts of Asia, it tends to be in this realistic terrestrial setting rather than in heaven looking down.
But it all sounds very familiar, right? Very similar, I guess.
Yeah, very similar, right? And so you're in the States now, right? And so
Yeah.
your son is sort of picking up on the American culture, and maybe you have too to a large extent, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was born here, so yes. But it's, it's so there, I mean, I think there's views about like, we believe in Hinduism, right? That you're reincarnated. There is no, whereas in Christianity, right? It's like you're in heaven or hell, but you're not coming back.
That's right.
I'm curious, Jim, like, is there, sorry to interrupt, Reshma, I've got questions too. I've got so many questions now. Um, this is the benefit of me doing this podcast is I get to just also
love
dive
it.
into these
You get to
curiosities.
jump in when you answer.
Yeah, exactly. So in these cases of past lives, which maybe manifest as, a child knowing their way back to an old village where they used to live in a past life, or having a birthmark or a scar from a former trauma, or however it manifests, how long, maybe in Sai's case, like how long do they remember this past life? Do they go through, because I mean, maybe when I was 3, I remembered having a past life, but now I'm 34 and I could not tell you that I was, so-and-so in a past life. Does it carry with these children through their lives?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, it varies. Um, in Stevenson's research, he felt like that memories always, or as a rule, he knew some, it didn't always, but he thought as a rule, the memories faded by late childhood, by age 8 or so.
Oh.
We know now that's not the case. There have been studies done on past life memory retention, although it's still the norm, it seems, for kids who have the memories very young, for them to fade. Many of them, my daughter talked about a past life when she was 3, and they faded, they stayed with her until she was 12.
Mm.
And after that, she lost them. Others preserve them into adulthood. Right.
Yeah.
And if they last into adolescence, so after the 12 years, after 12, they seem to last for life. So there are people who retain as adults who retain memories from childhood. There are also people more than Stevenson realized who have memories come to them for the first time in adulthood.
What's the difference between past life and deja vu? Because I feel like I have deja vu sometimes where I'm like, a lot actually, where I'm like, oh, I feel like
Yeah.
I've,
Well, there are different kinds of deja vu. There is a deja vu that is simply a neurological quirk, right? Then there's the deja vu that you see in some of these cases where, like I said, I mean, there are kids who show their way back to where they lived. I mean, they recognize this, and they'll recognize people there too. That also is a sort of a deja vu, isn't it? That's what I call a strong deja vu. There's also sort of the in-between type of deja vu where you go to a place and you'll feel like you were there before, but not only you feel like you're there before, you feel like you know the way around it.
Mm.
Right? You know something you shouldn't know. You show the way around like these kids do, So those sorts of things are called a sort of strong deja vu, and those are not neurological quirks.
yeah.
So is that overlap? Yeah.
Is it common for reincarnation and past lives to happen? Because it sounds like from what I'm hearing, at least so far, is that it happens kind of within communities. So somebody comes back and is reincarnated into somebody in a neighboring village or a building or a town or whatever. Or is there a lot of like cross cultural reincarnation? Are there instances of that where somebody is like, in a past life, I was me Irish or something, and
There are what we call international cases. They're not as common as one might think. In general, there is a tendency to be reborn in the same region. In Stevenson's data, and again, remember that it was primarily Asian, again, talking about the median, this is stuff, 25 kilometers, that's 15 and a half miles. I tend to think of this as sort of like we reincarnate in our comfort zones, right?
So
Because we
funny.
also we see typically it's in the same ethnic group too, the same linguistic group. Um, they're not that they all are, but that they are exceptions to a general rule.
Does it have logic to it? Because we believe in Hinduism is karma, right? Like it's about basically having your final life, and then you're with God, and getting to that place, and that you should live a good life, right? Live a decent life, be good to people. How do you think it works? I guess, or what you've seen in your research, or is it just random?
Yeah, we don't see much evidence for karma, either in the Hindu sense or the more rigid Buddhist sense. We just don't see it. And uh,
So you
um,
could be a total jerk, and you come back as a total jerk,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. Or
you still get to come back.
one of the things I like to point out. I mean, in karma theory, if you kill somebody, right, the karma should rebound on you. I mean, you should pay that in your next life.
Mm.
That's not what we see. If somebody is killed, they are the ones who bear the scars.
Oh, so they come back with a scar.
They have the birthmarks from the wounds. They'll have phobias from that place. They'll have PTSD like symptoms. It's the victims who bear the scars, not the perps.
That's so sad.
This is one reason why I think when trying to understand reincarnation, we really need to look at the cases and not at the. And the other thing about the religions and the metaphysical ideas is they're all different, right?
Yeah.
Every religion, every culture has different ideas about how this works. The only way to know for sure is to actually study cases scientifically, right? And what we see when we do that is none of the religions seem to have it exactly right.
It's sad, right, that the victims bear the scars, right? Like you're talking about the trauma, the PTSD. But I wonder too if that's like the other way to look at it is isn't, the more philosophical, maybe woo-woo way to look at it is it's an opportunity for that life to process that trauma in another life, right? To cope with it, to not go into, heaven or hell or wherever the afterlife is without having externalized that or dealt with it, maybe. Does that make sense, Rash? I don't know. I'm getting a little spiritual about
Yeah,
this, but
it does. I mean, I feel like what you're saying is like it's like you get a second chance.
yeah. To get it out of your system.
You're right, and to like to process it, to deal with it, to heal from it.
Yeah.
So when does it end?
Yeah, when does it end? Well, we don't know. I mean, how can we know, really? Um, I mean, it's possible that the whole thing is about letting go of all, like Buddhism says, letting go of everything, right? All materialism, all everything. And then you get to nirvana, or it's possible that once you work out all of your karma and everything, and then you're freed that way too. We really don't know. We don't know.
If I wanted somebody in my life to come back and be reincarnated, what do I need to do? How do I need to prepare them to come back as somebody that I want in my life?
Yeah. Are you talking about people who are already dead or before they
People who
die?
pass, and you miss them. How can I get them to come back to me? Do I need to bury them a certain way? Or their rituals?
No, none of that. We don't see there's no difference between if somebody is cremated or burial or how the
Yeah.
body's disposed of. It doesn't seem to have any relation to anything. If you have an opportunity to talk to them before they die, you can let them know how you feel. You want them to come back to you. And there are these cases where people plan before they die where they want to be reborn. It actually is a thing.
How? Can you please explain to me one of those cases?
There's one Brazilian case where a girl she was forbidden twice from marrying men that she was in love with. Her father just would not let her. So she basically essentially killed herself by contracting tuberculosis intentionally. And meanwhile, she told her best friend that she was going to come back to her. This is one of Stevenson's cases in 20 cases suggestive of reincarnation. The kid came back, in the family where that she had said, and she recalled, the life that she had left before. I mean, it's
Wow.
one of these cases with verified things. There are a number of them like this. We find them particularly in tribal societies.
What do you say when people probably say to you, Jim, that's crazy? No way. What do you say to that?
Look at the cases. I mean, I think that I'm data led, right? I mean, I didn't start with a belief in reincarnation, then go start looking for evidence for it.
Mm.
I was intrigued by the idea and started reading Stevenson. And the more I read, I thought, this is kind of interesting. And the more I read and the more I began to see the patterns and began to understand it, the more interesting I got, right? There are a lot of these cases that have been studied. So, yeah, I mean, it's easy to reject this if you haven't looked at the data. It's not so easy if you have. And I think that's tied to a growing recognition that the materialist ideas about consciousness being generated by the brain are breaking down. There are more and more people realizing that just does not work. Once that door is opened, once people realize consciousness is not generated by the brain, that maybe consciousness is separate from the body, right? Once you've made that leap, right, then it's much easier to say, okay, consciousness could survive death. Consciousness could be reincarnated, right? So it's changing and it's becoming, people are becoming more and more open to this. And it's becoming easier and easier to publish in mainstream journals.
What's the relationship to that with the decline in religion?
Public opinion polls in the United States have, and in Europe too, but particularly the US, have shown upwards of 25% self-professed Christians believe in reincarnation. So it's the church and officially that denies it, but the people, for whatever reason, I do not reject it.
So, wait, can you help me here? So, if consciousness exists outside of the body, what does that mean?
That would mean that our brains, our bodies work with the consciousness. The consciousness is outside, and the conscious interfaces with the brain, interfaces with the body, right? And so when they're looking at the brain and seeing different parts of the brain light up under certain conditions, what they're not seeing where consciousness comes alive so much as they're seeing the points at which consciousness interfaces with the brain.
And how does AI fit into this?
Yeah, well, it doesn't really relate at all. I mean, in what way were you thinking?
I don't know. Can it capture consciousness or like can it replicate? Like, how does that fit in or could it fit in?
Well, there's a lot of talk about this, and can you imagine hybrids? Organic AI robot hybrids, and I mean, this stuff is still science fiction, and I don't know that it'll ever go anywhere into science reality, but there are people who talk about it. Their philosophers talk about it. They, being where you are, even though you're in Southern California,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I'm sure you hear a lot of this sort of stuff, and so
Well, I'm so glad you asked this question, Reshma. I'm recording in this studio and there's like an AI conference happening downstairs in the same building. Of course, you can't not talk about AI, but am I getting your question right that you're essentially asking like if I were talking to my chat GPT and like, looking up questions and doing research, if all of a sudden it was like, hey, Tanya, I'm so and so from a past life and I speak this language actually. Do you remember me? Like is that kind of what you're getting at, Rush?
Yeah, a little bit of that. Yeah, or if some, I don't know. I just also feel like if consciousness is something outside my body, can that be controlled or manipulated in any way? I'm just so like I'm just struggling of like what is the consciousness if the consciousness isn't God? Because I think when you talk about that, Jim, I think about the fact that that's like the ultimate, you know what I mean, kind of puppeteer is in my is Krishna in our life in my religion.
yeah, I mean, the way I talk about it is not that far different from the way consciousness is talked about in Hinduism, right?
Yeah.
Forgive me for not knowing this, but again, your book didn't arrive in time, so we're starting from zero. Do you study reincarnation in animals? Is that something that we see? And I ask also because Reshma,
Yes.
had a pet that passed away. That was her
Who
first
I call
baby.
my soul dog. Yes.
Her soul
right.
dog, Stanley. And Stanley passed away a year or two ago, I think. And we all love Stanley. And so I just, I'm curious if people have experienced. I also I adopted a puppy about a year and a half ago. And I brought her home to visit my parents, and my parents said, "Oh my gosh, she has the same behaviors, the same eyes, like of our dog from 6-7 years ago. It is uncanny." Is this something that you've seen or studied?
Yeah, actually.
Okay.
Tell us everything.
And let me ask you, as an entry into this, did the puppy recognize things in your parents' home? Did she know where the food was and things like this?
No, but I'm going to go back and ask them now, because we lived in a different house at this point. So we had moved. So there wouldn't be any kind of like locational reference.
I mean, I could talk about, for my dog, Stanley, I felt like and then when people call their dogs their soul dogs, like we just knew each other. She kind of knew when I was upset or when something was about to happen, or just there was a sense of real familiarity. Like I actually thought she was like a child of mine or in a past life, right? But we were on the same wavelength. And look, I have another dog now who I love, but it's not like that. You know what I mean? It's not the same feeling that I had, or connection, I should say, or like, it's like the sense of familiarity. Like, I know you, we've walked this earth before.
I've studied most intensively what are called after-death communications involving animals. And they turn out to be very, very similar to human after-death communications. These are things like, having dreams of the animals, feeling their presence, this type of thing. I've collected a lot of the reincarnation accounts too, but haven't yet written about them. What is fascinating about both the after-death communications and the reincarnation things is how similar they are to the human accounts. With the animal stuff, it's the same sorts of signs that we see with the humans. So like with human cases, it's recognitions of people, right? Same with the animals, recognizing people or recognizing places, right? Certain behaviors that are distinctive that carry over, and the same with the animals. So again, and the dreams, these sort of announcing dreams, as we call them, these are dreams that generally a pregnant woman, but sometimes before she becomes pregnant, or maybe her husband or somebody close to her, will have a dream about the person who's going to be reincarnated. We see this with animals too. So on point after point after point, we see the same things going on with animals as we do with people.
Huh.
Wow.
Now, the reason I got interested in this is because theoretically, I mean, one of the things you have to ask is, when did reincarnation start? All right.
Okay.
Did it start with human beings? And if so, where along the human line did it start? Well, it seemed to me that it obviously had to start somewhere. The most logical point for me is when life began. Okay. As soon as there was death, there was reincarnation. Now, that implies that all life reincarnates, right? Okay.
Yes.
And if that is true, then we should see with animals exactly what we see with animals.
And it would track though, which is what my guru would say to me, is that animals though won't come back as humans. Animals come back as animals. Like, just like, right? You're saying that most people kind of stay in the same.
But that's still my same sense that reincarnation is typically, if not always, within species lines. But with animals, it can cross breeds very often, both with cats and dogs. But there are also a lot of these animal cases of what I call transmigration as opposed to reincarnation. Transmigration is across species lines, reincarnation within species. And so I've collected a lot of them too, and they need to be analyzed and they need to be understood. And I don't see as much good evidence for that happening as I do for within species reincarnation.
But I see what you're saying, Jim, is that, it started somewhere, right? And if we have evolved from apes, from animals, from whatever we've evolved from, then presumably at some point we were microorganisms, right? So like, or dinosaurs or whatever it may be. And so
We go back far enough, right?
Yeah, we've reincarnated along the evolutionary line. So not necessarily between species, but kind of, right?
Yeah, well, when one species dies out, you have to go into my rule of thumb has been, I mean, we know that different species can interbreed sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Not always effectively. Sometimes the offspring can have children, other times they can't. So my rule sort of has been reincarnation may be sort of the same way, right? Our consciousness may be able to control some bodies of other species, but if they're too different from the species that we're accustomed to, then no. But you mentioned microorganisms, and this is very interesting because there's a growing amount of research showing that even bacteria, single-celled organisms, can learn. If they can learn, they can remember. That puts a total lie to memories being in the brain.
Because they don't have brains.
I mean, there's just no way that memories can be in the brain if you've got microorganisms, single cell bacteria, and other single cell organisms remembering. And so that's one of the things that sort of puts it in consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Now, the materialists still like to see this as a chemical sort of thing and all this, and they still want to see in this material this way. But it at least makes one wonder if, in fact, there is this thing. And the people who do this, who are doing this study, unabashedly say that they have evidence that they're not just remembering, but they're conscious in some sense, that they are deliberately taking certain actions. I mean, this is incredible to think about, right?
That's surreal. That's surreal.
It's incredible.
But we really have to get away of the idea that we humans are so unique. We're not. We're animals too, and we're just at the end of this evolution. Or, we're further, all animals have evolved, right? For as long as we've evolved, and just some of them have stayed with certain forms, whereas we've, moved on to what we have now. That doesn't mean we're at the end of anything. We're where we are now. So, but we have to realize that we're all part of this whole thing,
The
right?
same thing. We're not all that different.
We're not all
So,
that different.
as we close out here, so do you think you've lived a past life?
I'm sure I did. I don't have memories of one.
Does that bother you?
No, it doesn't really bother me. No, it doesn't bother me. Now, a great aunt of mine told my parents at one point, it must have been something that I did. They said, he's my father. He's the reincarnation of my father.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I don't have memories of his life or anything like that.
Yeah.
But very often we see reincarnations in family lines. And so, I can't say it's impossible, but I don't have any memories of that. I don't. But it's interesting that somebody of that generation had that idea, saw something. Now, remember, I was born in 1954. The Search for Bridey Murphy came out in 1956. Right? And so the Search for Bridey Murphy brought reincarnation to the consciousness, a worldwide consciousness, right? And so I think my great aunt may have been aware of that, picked that up. And so that's where the idea of looking for reincarnation came from. But because, late 50s, this is a little bit early to start talking about people like that.
What was the name of the book again? The World of...
It's called The Search for Bridey Murphy. And it was published in 1956, became a bestseller. And look into it. I mean, it's just wild. People started, it became a bestseller. People started having come as you were parties.
Oh,
It was
that's
a really,
awesome.
really big thing. But the debunkers could not leave it alone. They got in and successfully debunked it. Well, not successfully. I mean, successfully from a cultural point of view, not successfully from a
Like
scientific
it
point of view.
ignited reincarnation and people remained fascinated by it, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, basically. And then in the 60s, there was more of an interest. In the 60s, you started getting people interested in Hinduism and so forth, and
Yeah.
reading some of those texts, and that sort of brought it back to right.
This is amazing. I know we're getting close to time, so I want to be mindful of that. But I hope that, people listening to this, I hope I get people calling in being like, yeah, when I was 3, or I have a child who says this, and then I can send them all to Jim to study.
Okay, wonderful. I'll be glad to feel all that.
No, this is so wonderful. So I guess thank you so much for taking the time, Jim, and thank you for joining, and Rash, you too. I'm so grateful, and
I'm like dying to read The Search of Bridey Murphy now.
That was a regression case, not one of these child cases, but it was, it was set in Ireland, an American set in Ireland.
I'm gonna have to email you and ask you for book recommendations so I can share them with listeners as well. But can you let us know? I'm just, so for anyone who wants to find your book or your work, can you tell us a little bit about that before we close out? So anyone who's super curious and just wants to jump into this field like you did in a library in 1980 or whatever it was, tell us more about your book and where we can find you.
Oh, well, thank you. I actually have 2 books on this. The first one is called I Saw a Light and Came Here. And that was co-authored with an Icelandic researcher named Erlendur Haraldsson, written for a more general audience. And I did talk about some of my own cases in that book. The other one, and this may be the one you were asking about, is called Signs of Reincarnation, exploring beliefs, cases, and theory. And that one is for a different publisher. That one is for an academic publisher. And so it treats the phenomena in a different way. But those are the 2 books. I Saw a Light and Came Here, and then Signs of Reincarnation.
Reshma, one of those is on its way to you. But any last thoughts before we close out here and hit stop record? So
you blew my mind. I feel like I knew none of this. And like the way I thought about reincarnation was so different. Like I never thought of, I never knew that like most of the cases were like in the same community, in the same ethnicity, like this and this point about even like animals and species and how we're so similar. So I'm a nerd and a geek, and I love learning new things. And so I really, really appreciate your time, and thank you for your wisdom.
When I started this podcast, someone asked me a really great question. He said, would you still do this even if nobody listened to it? And my answer was like, yes, unequivocally, absolutely no questions. I would do this even if not a single soul listened to this podcast. This project has been such a joy for me. I look forward to recording every episode, to doing the research, to bringing together 2 people who just like wouldn't otherwise meet. It's been just something really, really special. If you did enjoy listening and you do want to share it, that would just be an added bonus. Give it a follow, like, share, drop your comments and questions, review. We are Smart People Get Curious everywhere, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. If you have someone you'd like to see on the show, please let me know. If you have a topic you want to suggest for one of our guests, please let me know. In the meantime, stay curious. Big thanks to Cameron, my amazing producer, Ruby Western, for the incredible design, and not just to the guests who join us every week, but also to their amazing EAs, executive assistants on all sides, scheduling and coordinating this podcast across multiple time zones with multiple people is no small feat. So super grateful to you.